closed themselves out. I had to get back to it. Sorry about that. So as Christ followers, we're built to be in community with one another. It's not an if, it's a must. We are meant to spur one another on. We're meant to encourage one another. We're meant to live in deep relationship together. Now that doesn't mean that each and every person in this room is going to be deeply involved with each and every person, but we need to have those people in our lives that we are deeply connected with. In our culture today, though, we can be connected more than ever. And think about this, through social media, through texting, through a cell phone in almost every hand, we can be connected with thousands of people around the world. You would think that because of that, we would have more relationships and deeper relationships than ever, but that doesn't seem to be the case, does it? Studies are actually starting to show the dangers of being connected like we are today. And it's leading to an issue of isolation. It's actually being seen that kids younger than high school age shouldn't have any type of social media because of the bullying, the isolation, all the problems that can come from it. It's leading to an issue of isolation in our culture. But I've seen this in my own life at times, and not even when all this technology was available. I've seen it on the rise with younger people as well. Even when you're with someone face to face, we can lose that connection. We don't have the ability to have deep conversations sometimes. I've seen it. You go to a restaurant now, and you sit down and you watch people around you. And there can be a couple at the table, and they never speak a word to each other because they're sitting there glued to their phones. And that's something that Kelly and I have fought hard against. We try not to do that with each other. We actually have our best conversations over the dinner table at times. But the question is, though, is technology the problem? Is technology what has led to that? No. Isolation has always been part of human nature. It's just that with the advances in technology, the problem is becoming more prevalent. It's becoming easier to see. It's becoming magnified. We have the ability to be in contact with so many people from all around the world, but all too often we lose either the ability or the desire to have a true and deep conversation with somebody that we're sitting across the table from. Again, this is something that we've actually seen throughout history. It's not a new issue. Think about all the monks that go and lock themselves away in a monastery somewhere. What do most of them do? They take vows of silence. They're not having conversations with anybody. They're not trying to spread the message of Christianity. They lock themselves away in isolation in an attempt to live a godly life, but they're not following through with living this life together and what it means to go out and reach others for Jesus. We're meant to encourage. We're meant to help one another. We're meant to spur one another on. And we're meant to share the message of Jesus Christ with others. Now, I think Paul understood this need for community. He wrote about it, how we are from one body, how we form one body, even though we're many. We form one body under the headship of Christ. He writes about that extensively in Romans. But he also talks about it in an expanded way in 1 Corinthians to his letter to the Corinthian church. So if you want to turn to it, it's 1 Corinthians 12 through 31 is the part that we're going to look at. And many of you are going to be familiar with this. He talks about that we're all parts of the body, but that we fit together. He says, "For just as the body is one and has many parts, all the parts of that body, though many, are one body. So also is Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, whether slaves or free, and we were all given one Spirit to drink. Indeed, the body is not one part, but many. If the foot should say, 'Because I'm not a hand, I don't belong to the body,' it is not for that reason any less part of the body. And if the ear should say, 'Because I'm not an eye, I don't belong to the body,' it is not for that reason any less part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God has arranged each one of the parts in the body just as He wanted. And if they were all the same part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. Or again, the head can't say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that are weaker are indispensable. And those parts of the body that we consider less honorable, we clothe these with greater honor. And our unrespectable parts are treated with greater respect, which our respectable parts do not need. Instead, God has put the body together with giving greater honor to the less honorable, so that there would be no division in the body, but that the members would have the same concern for each other. So if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. If one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it. Now you are the body of Christ and individual members of it. And God has appointed these in the church: first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, next miracles, then gifts of healing, helping, administrating, various kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all do miracles? Do all have the gifts of healing? Do all speak in other tongues? Do all interpret? But desire the greater gifts, and I will show you an even better way. You see, we have our differences. We have our individual roles in the body of Christ. But we are to function and live in community together. Each part is just as important as the next. Each person is just as important as the next. We all function together, and when we lose that, the body suffers. Now again, there's going to be certain parts of the body that work better together with other parts. Doesn't mean that we all have to be best friends with every single person, but we have to have a respect and we have to have a working relationship. We have to live in community together. We need to be in fellowship with other Christians, with other Christ followers, and not just on a surface level. You know, here on Sunday morning is great, but we need deep relationships with others. Again, we're not always going to click with everybody, but there is a need and a desire for deeper relationships with those that are Christ followers. Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, he talks about helping one another along the way. In Galatians 6, verse 2, he says, "Carry one another's burdens. In this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." Carry one another's burdens. You don't do that unless you know what their burdens are, do you? We have to come alongside one another and help each other, but it doesn't say that one person carries everybody's burdens. We share that responsibility. He also tells us in Romans 15 that we actually have an obligation to help those that are weaker than we are. Romans 15, 1 and 2, he says, "Now we who are strong have an obligation to bear the weaknesses of those without strength and not to please ourselves. Each one of us is to please his neighbor for his good, to build him up." Again, just that idea. We have to come alongside one another. We have to be helping others. And it's not a if or a should, it's a must. The author of Hebrews also writes about the necessity of Christian fellowship in a couple of different places. In Hebrews 10, verse 24 and 25, and this is one that most of you will be familiar with, the author writes, he says, "And let us watch out for one another to provoke love and good works, not neglecting to gather together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging each other, and all the more as you see the day approaching." So not neglect meeting with one another. Yes, he's talking about on Sunday mornings as a church body, but he's talking about coming together with friends that are like-minded Christ followers as well. Because later in chapter 13, verses 1 and 2, he says, "Let brotherly love continue. Don't neglect to show hospitality, For by doing this, some have welcomed angels as guests without knowing it. Don't neglect to show hospitality. Now, he's writing to a culture that hospitality was a way of life, but it's still something for us as well. We need to be showing hospitality to one another. You see, the fact is that isolation from other Christ followers is part of my story. It's something that I've had in my past. It's not something that I'm proud of, but it's part of how I came to be who I am today. When I was in middle school and high school, church was life for me. We were there every time the doors of the church were opened. I was very, very heavily involved in our youth group, trying to do everything that I could to help others with their walk for Christ. And we fought very hard to get rid of cliques in that youth group. When I first came into that youth group, it was a youth group of about 40 or 50, but there were groups within that group, and we fought very hard to unify that group. And then I graduated high school and graduated on to the college-age Sunday school class, and I stepped into that class and realized that all of those cliques that we had fought so hard to get rid of had reappeared. And I used that as an excuse. I said I didn't have the energy or the desire to fight that anymore, but I used that as an excuse to kind of step away. And it wasn't anything I meant to do on purpose. I was still going to church, but I wasn't going to a Sunday school class. And then the next thing I know, a couple of months later, I had missed church a couple of Sundays. And the next thing I know, I was maybe at church once a month. And at the same time as this, I was going to school. I was in college, but I was living at home. I was living 30 minutes away from college, so I was driving in for class every day and driving home. You don't have time to make friends while you're at school when that's the situation. I was working a job where basically when you were on shift, you were the only one there because it was a laser tag place and there was only one person needed. And before I knew it, I was living in almost complete isolation. Not just from other people in general, but especially from other Christ followers. And it took about 2 years before I realized all of this was going on. And it took another 2 years to fight back to where I was before I fell into that isolation. I would never say that I walked away from God, but I walked away from His call to gather with other people and be in community with others. I found myself isolated. Again, I was going to college, I was living at home, but a half-hour drive. I wasn't making those relationships. I wasn't going to church. I wasn't seeing people at work. I wasn't finding the relationships that I needed to have. And I think Solomon kind of sums it up in Ecclesiastes, what can happen and what he saw when he saw that isolation in others. Ecclesiastes 4, verses 7 through 12. It says, "Again, I saw futility under the sun. There's a person without a companion, without even a son or brother. And though there is no end to all his struggles, his eyes are still not content with riches. Who am I struggling for, he asks, and depriving myself of good things? This too is futile and a miserable task. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their efforts. For if either falls, his companion can lift him up, but pity the one who falls without another to lift him up. Also, if two lie down together, they can keep warm. But how can one person alone keep warm? And if someone overpowers one person, two can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken." It's not about having the largest number of friends that you could have. It's not about having the most connections that you can have. It's about having the close, deep relationships that we need. That's the lesson that we're starting to understand from the issues that social media is bringing to the forefront. We can have the ability to connect to thousands of people from all around the world, but are we developing those deep-rooted relationships that we need with those that we should be the closest to? Those that we should have an intimate relationship with. That's what I've tried to work on since my realization that I had become isolated in college. And it took hitting rock bottom before I realized that and had to fight through that. While being committed to being in a regular fellowship with the church body, I've made a focused effort on building deep relationships with at least a few individuals as well. People that I know that I can go to when I've lost my way. People that want nothing but the best for me in my relationship and walk with God. One, of course, is Kelly. And your spouse should be that person if you are fortunate enough to have that relationship. But I have others that I know that I can reach out to at any point. I lost one of those friends this week. A man that some of you may remember. He's preached here a couple of times. His wife and him sang one time that they were here. Gerald Jocelyn, again, he passed away suddenly Wednesday night. Sat down in his recliner about 8:45 and went into cardiac arrest and didn't make it till the paramedics got there. Since I've been here in Oklahoma, he has been one of the people that I had been able to have those deep conversations with about life, about ministry, about whatever. And he always wanted to check in and see how things were going. And I will always be grateful for that. My challenge to you this morning is this. If you don't have at least 2 or 3 people in your life that you can have those deep conversations with, that you can have those deep, Christ-honoring relationships with, that can encourage you, that you can encourage, if you don't have that, find that. Find somebody. Don't forsake a church fellowship. I'm not saying that this isn't important. This is very important, what we do here on Sunday mornings. But find a small group of people that you can go beyond the surface relationships with and dig deep. As my title this morning says, we are better together. If you have any decision you need to make this morning, now's the time to do so as we stand and sing all verses of Open My Eyes That I May See, number 563.